Deep beneath the Ural Mountains, in a hardened bunker carved from rock and reinforced steel, the air hung thick with the metallic scent of ozone and stale cigarette smoke. Screens flickered with coded data streams, their green phosphorescence casting a sickly glow across the faces of men whose expressions were etched with a profound, almost paralyzing dread. An urgent, almost whispered report cut through the low hum of machinery, confirming what had been feared for days. The enemy, it seemed, was preparing for the unthinkable. This isn't an exercise, not anymore. For the past 72 hours, a relentless torrent of intelligence poured into this subterranean command post, each fragment amplifying a terrifying, escalating pattern. NATO's annual Able Archer exercise, a routine simulation of a conventional conflict escalating to nuclear war, was unfolding with an unprecedented, chilling realism. The movements of command and control elements, the coded communications traffic, the sudden radio silence from forward units, everything indicated not a drill, but a genuine coordinated ascent towards a first strike. The world's two superpowers were not playing war games. One side was convinced the other was about to ignite the real one. In these claustrophobic chambers, isolated from the world above, the decisions now being weighed could erase entire continents. The decisions made in those terrifying hours were not born in a vacuum. They were the culmination of years of escalating tension, a corrosive climate of mistrust that had steadily eroded the foundations of international stability. The early 1980s had witnessed a precipitous decline in relations between Washington and Moscow, each side viewing the other through a prism of profound suspicion and existential threat. In Washington, a new resolve had taken root. President Ronald Reagan, embodying a robust anti-communist stance, had famously denounced the Soviet Union as an evil empire in March 1983. This rhetoric, perceived in Moscow as an explicit declaration of ideological war, resonated deeply with Soviet fears of American aggression. It fueled a narrative within the Kremlin that painted the United States not merely as a rival, but as a hostile power actively seeking the collapse of the Soviet system. Compounding this verbal assault was a stark military reality: the deployment of new intermediate-range nuclear missiles in Western Europe. The American Pershing II ballistic missiles, with their enhanced accuracy and reduced flight times to Soviet targets, along with ground-launched cruise missiles, represented a critical shift in the strategic balance. For Soviet strategists, these weapons were not merely defensive. They were first-strike capable, drastically shortening the reaction window and amplifying the perceived threat of a decapitating attack. The deployment was seen as a deliberate provocation, placing Moscow on a hair-trigger alert. The atmosphere was further poisoned by tragic incidents that underscored the fragility of peace. In September 1983, just weeks before the Able Archer exercise, Korean Airlines Flight 07, a civilian airliner, strayed into Soviet airspace and was shot down by a Soviet interceptor. All 269 passengers and crew perished. This act, interpreted by the West as barbaric and inexcusable, was seen by Moscow as a necessary defensive action against what they believed was a deliberate intelligence provocation. The incident inflamed global outrage, pushing an already strained relationship to the very edge. Beneath this overt animosity pulsed a deeper current, a profound Soviet war scare mentality. Unlike the West's more compartmentalized view of military exercises, Soviet doctrine frequently blurred the lines between simulation and actual preparation. Their intelligence services, particularly the GRU and KGB, were under immense pressure from Yuri Andropov, the former head of the KGB and now General Secretary, to monitor any indications of a Western first strike. They operated under the assumption that a surprise attack was not only possible, but likely, a historical echo of Nazi Germany's 1941 invasion. This ingrained paranoia meant that any deviation from the norm, any heightened activity could be, and often was, interpreted as a prelude to a genuine assault. Soviet military intelligence, tasked with an almost impossible burden, meticulously tracked every perceived move of NATO forces. From signals intelligence intercepting communication frequencies to human intelligence within Western governments, every data point was filtered through a doctrinal lens that anticipated deceit and preemptive aggression. They were not merely looking for evidence of an attack, they were often expecting to find it. This psychological predisposition, coupled with the sophisticated nature of Able Archer 83 itself, which included the simulated transition from conventional to nuclear conflict, the involvement of heads of government, and a unique radio silence protocol, created the perfect storm for a catastrophic misreading of intentions. The stakes were nothing less than the end of civilization, and the thin line between exercise and reality had blurred to a dangerous, almost invisible point. The stage for this unprecedented escalation was set by Able Archer 83, a NATO command post exercise designed to simulate a transition from conventional conflict to nuclear warfare. Scheduled for early November 1983, it was conceived as the most realistic and comprehensive nuclear release drill ever undertaken by the Alliance. Unlike previous iterations, this exercise incorporated a suite of enhanced features intended to test the robustness of NATO's command and control mechanisms under extreme stress. These included the use of highly realistic, classified communication formats and encryption systems, previously reserved only for actual wartime. The exercise also simulated the involvement of actual heads of state in the decision-making process, a departure from prior drills which typically involved only military personnel. Crucially, Able Archer 83 practiced the procedures for escalating alerts from DEFCON 5 to DEFCON 1, culminating in the simulated release of nuclear weapons. This involved the movement of thousands of troops across Europe, the deployment of tactical aircraft, and the implementation of procedures for transferring nuclear release authority from political leaders to military commanders. The entire simulation was designed to be as convincing as possible, a visible demonstration of NATO's capability and resolve. Its very realism, however, became its most dangerous attribute. In an atmosphere already charged with mistrust and Cold War paranoia, these unprecedented elements were not perceived by Soviet intelligence as a drill, but as a potential cover for a genuine first strike. From Moscow, the signals were alarming. Soviet intelligence agencies, particularly the KGB and GRU, had been tasked with identifying any preparatory activities for a Western nuclear attack under Operation Ryan, a Russian acronym for nuclear missile attack. Their directives were clear: look for anything out of the ordinary, any deviation from normal military routines that could signify an imminent offensive. When Able Archer 83 commenced, the intelligence reports flowing into the Kremlin painted a deeply concerning picture. The shift to real-world communication protocols, the heightened alert status of NATO bases, the dispersal of command posts, and the simulated nuclear release messages were all interpreted through the lens of Operation Ryan. They were seen not as practice, but as the final stages of preparations for war. The Soviet leadership, already convinced of Washington's aggressive intentions and deeply suspicious of Reagan's anti-communist rhetoric, found these reports profoundly unsettling. Yuri Andropov, the ailing Soviet General Secretary, had a deeply ingrained suspicion of American motives, a perspective shaped by his past as a long-serving KGB chairman. He genuinely believed that the US was preparing a decisive strike. This conviction cascaded down through the Soviet military and intelligence apparatus. KGB station chiefs were sending back increasingly frantic reports, relaying observed movements and communications that seemed to confirm their worst fears. In response, Moscow elevated its military alert levels. Soviet forces in East Germany and Poland, along with strategic air forces, were placed on a heightened state of readiness. Reconnaissance flights were increased, and several nuclear-capable aircraft were moved from their normal bases to dispersal airfields, their crews on standby. Military leave was cancelled for certain units, a clear sign of impending crisis. The situation developed into a dangerous feedback loop. NATO's realistic drill, intended as a deterrent, was perceived by the Soviets as genuine preparation for war. The Soviet reaction, in turn, could have been interpreted by NATO as aggressive posturing, potentially escalating the real-world tension. The climax of this undeclared crisis arrived as the Able Archer exercise progressed through its final, most sensitive phases, simulating the transition to nuclear warfare. In bunkers deep beneath the Kremlin, intelligence analysts and military advisors grappled with a terrifying dilemma. Was this the true prelude to annihilation? The fear was palpable, the stakes unfathomable. Soviet early warning systems were monitored with excruciating intensity for any sign of a missile launch. Commanders stood ready, poised for the order to retaliate. The world unknowingly teetered on the precipice, a misinterpretation away from an unthinkable global conflict. The very real possibility existed that Soviet command would mistake a simulated launch for a genuine one, triggering a devastating counterstrike based on a drill. It was a moment of profound global peril, where the absence of a catastrophic decision was the most critical action taken. The climax of Able Archer 83 came as the exercise reached its final, most realistic phase, simulating a transition from conventional warfare to nuclear exchanges. Yet, as the simulated conflict intensified, a subtle but critical shift began to occur behind the scenes. Soviet leadership, while still deeply concerned, started receiving intelligence that, while not entirely dismissing the threat, offered alternative interpretations. Reports from within NATO, some gathered through traditional espionage channels, others through technical intelligence, indicated that despite the unprecedented realism, the exercise lacked certain definitive indicators of an actual impending attack. One of the most crucial, though often unacknowledged sources of insight came from figures like Oleg Gordievsky, a KGB defector who had been providing intelligence to British MI6. While his direct warnings about the Soviet misinterpretation of Able Archer 83 only reached Western leaders with full impact after the exercise concluded, the general tenor of intelligence from sources like him, indicating Soviet paranoia, had already begun to filter through. This intelligence, combined with NATO's own post-exercise review, helped to clarify the extent of Soviet alarm and the genuine risk of miscalculation. The sheer scale and realism of the exercise had inadvertently pushed the Soviets to the brink, prompting an internal re-evaluation of Western intentions once the immediate simulated threat passed. Ultimately, the crisis was defused not by a single dramatic intervention, but by a series of quiet, often uncoordinated human decisions to de-escalate rather than retaliate. NATO's exercise concluded as planned, without any further military provocations or unusual mobilizations beyond the scope of the drill. This return to normalcy, the cessation of the heightened alert posture, served as a powerful, albeit unspoken, signal to the Kremlin. The absence of a follow-up, real-world military action after the simulated attack gradually allowed Soviet intelligence to recategorize the event as an exercise, albeit one dangerously close to reality. The key to averting catastrophe lay in the nuanced interpretation of complex, often contradictory intelligence, coupled with a fundamental human reluctance to initiate global nuclear war. Despite the high-stakes game of chicken, both sides possessed a core of individuals who, when faced with the ultimate decision, chose caution over escalation. It was a testament to the fact that even within rigid military and political structures, individual judgment and a glimmer of doubt could prevent the final, irreversible step. The world had come closer to nuclear war than many realized, not through intent, but through a dangerous confluence of technological simulation, deeply ingrained paranoia, and a critical breakdown in empathetic understanding between two superpowers. The lessons learned from Able Archer 83 were profound and enduring, shaping subsequent decades of international relations. It highlighted the absolute necessity of clear, unambiguous crisis communication channels, even, especially, between adversaries. The incident underscored the perilous nature of misperception, demonstrating how a defensive exercise could be interpreted as a preparatory act for war, igniting a dangerous feedback loop of fear and heightened alert. It forced a re-evaluation of nuclear deterrence doctrine, emphasizing the need for robust confidence-building measures and transparency to mitigate the inherent risks of a hair-trigger world. The incident served as a stark reminder of the immense responsibility inherent in possessing nuclear weapons. It wasn't just about the hardware, the missiles, and the warheads, but the human minds controlling them, the intelligence analysts interpreting the signals, and the leaders making the final, irreversible decisions. The fragility of peace was laid bare, revealing how easily human error, misunderstanding, or even simple operational routines could inadvertently push humanity to the precipice. Able Archer, 83, became a silent alarm, a chilling historical footnote that continues to inform our understanding of international security, underscoring the critical role of human judgment, restraint, and an unwavering commitment to communication in averting catastrophe. It remains a testament to both the terrifying potential for global conflict and the capacity for humanity, in its most desperate moments, to step back from the brink. This chilling chapter of history, hidden in declassified archives, reminds us how fragile our world truly is. To uncover more critical moments when humanity teetered on the edge, join our community. Subscribe to The Red Threshold, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the secrets that shaped our world.